All right, let's jump right into this. We are bringing you a completely fascinating explainer today about one of the most legendary tactical takedowns in American history. We're going to look at exactly how law enforcement dismantled the most powerful, deeply entrenched criminal syndicate this country has literally ever seen.
Now, to really get the magnitude of this, you've got to picture New York City in the 1970s and 80s. The government wasn't truly running the city, the mafia was. I mean, it was this golden era for organized crime. They completely controlled legal industries, like construction and waste management, alongside all the illegal ones, like gambling and extortion. We are talking about an untamable beast. So how on earth did the FBI take down an empire of this size?
Well, to grasp the sheer scale of the operation, just consider this number: $60 billion. Federal officials estimated the mafia's annual income could actually exceed that number. That was essentially the budget of an entire country at the time. It was just absolute chaos. There were more than 50 bank robberies a month in New York alone. And you know, it wasn't just street crime. They were incredibly sophisticated. One mobster orchestrated this massive gas tax fraud using shell companies that netted a staggering $8 to $10 million every single week. The city was bleeding money, and law enforcement was frankly completely overwhelmed.
Section 1. The Untouchable Five Families.
So, who was actually behind this massive shadow economy? Well, let's meet the unbeatable final bosses of our story. These are the five families and their leaders during this era. You've got the Gambino family led by Paul Castellano, the Genovese family under Vincent Gigante, the Colombo family under Carmine Persico, the Lucchese family led by Tony Corallo, and the Bonanno family headed up by Philip Rastelli. These groups brought this ruthless, highly structured culture of organized crime over from 19th century Italy. And the crucial point here is how they were structured. They operated just like a rigid military. You had the boss at the absolute top, then the underboss, the capos, and finally the soldiers down at the bottom. This structure brilliantly insulated the top bosses. The low-level soldiers did all the dirty work, the violent crimes, and just handed the money up. If the FBI caught a soldier, they'd get, a year or two in prison. But the roots of the tree remained completely untouched. The FBI was basically powerless against the actual leadership.
Section 2. The RICO Act Game Changer.
So, the FBI finally realizes that arresting low-level guys one by one just isn't working. They needed a secret weapon to break this impenetrable pyramid. And surprisingly enough, they found it in a law written way back in 1970 by a professor named Robert Blakey. This required a massive paradigm shift. See, before this law, you could only really jail the person who actually pulled the trigger or physically robbed the bank. The bosses giving the orders were totally safe. But after this new law, if the FBI could prove a boss ordered a crime as part of an ongoing criminal enterprise, that boss was held fully liable for it.
This law is the famous RICO Act, and it literally changed everything. By 1980, the FBI finally figured out how to use this tool properly, and they set up 5 dedicated task forces, one for each family. But of course, there was a major catch. Mafia members took a strict vow of silence. They absolutely would not testify. So the FBI had to get creative. They needed to hear the orders coming directly from the boss's own mouths. And that brings us to their bold new strategy, an unprecedented campaign of secret wiretaps.
Section 3. The Great Wiretap War.
This is where we kick off an incredible, almost heist-like phase of the explainer. The FBI brought in a specialist, Agent John Cantamessa, who was known as the Black Bag Man. His entire job was to sneak into heavily fortified mob strongholds and plant listening devices. His first major target was the Gambino family. Boss Paul Castellano lived in this massive Staten Island mansion dubbed the White House, surrounded by guards and killers. Breaking in at night? Completely impossible. But the FBI noticed something really interesting. Castellano loved holding his secret meetings in his kitchen, right next to his modern television. So Agent Cantamessa's team intentionally caused interference on Castellano's cable line from outside the property. When the mob inevitably called for a repairman, Cantamessa shows up in full uniform, walks right past the armed guards into the kitchen, fakes a repair, and brilliantly plants a bug right inside the TV. It worked perfectly.
Next up was the Colombo family. The FBI found out they held their secret meetings in the back room of a Brooklyn restaurant called Casa Storta. But there was a massive obstacle here. A huge guard dog named Nina patrolled the restaurant at night. During a really tense midnight break-in, the agents picked the front lock, and when Nina charged, an agent quickly sprayed her with a CO2 fire extinguisher. It safely startled and disoriented her without causing any harm at all, which gave Cantamessa just enough time to sneak into the back room and plant the bugs.
But you have to remember, the Mafia were not stupid. They were incredibly perceptive adversaries. Casa Storta was loud anyway, plates crashing, people yelling, so the audio was hard to decipher. But worse than that, just days into the operation, a mobster in that back room noticed a single extra wire running along the wall. He instantly knew what it was and just cut it. The bug went dead. The FBI quickly learned that one tiny mistake could ruin literally years of work.
They realized they had to be even stealthier for the Lucchesi family. Boss Tony Corallo was super cautious. He conducted all his sensitive business while being driven around in his subordinate Sal Avellino's black Jaguar. To bug a moving car, the FBI actually went out and bought an identical dummy Jaguar. Agents practiced disassembling the dashboard and wiring a bug directly to the car's battery over and over and over again. When they finally located Avellino's real car parked on a dark, rainy night, they executed the break-in perfectly. They planted the device in just 45 seconds.
But then, disaster struck. The bug actually drained the Jaguar's battery. When the car wouldn't start, the mobster called a tow truck to take it to the dealership. The FBI panicked. I mean, if the dealership mechanics looked under the dash, the entire RICO case was completely blown. So in this gripping sequence of events, the FBI had local police pull the tow truck over on a fake traffic stop. While the officer distracted the driver, FBI agents secretly scrambled into the Jaguar on the back of the tow truck and ripped the bugs out just in the nick of time. And crazy enough, they later managed to reinstall them in another 45-second lightning raid.
Section 4. Uncovering the Commission. So, the wiretaps were yielding massive results across the board. While investigating the Genovese family at a mob hangout called the Palmer Boys Club, the FBI targeted a man they thought was the boss, completely missing that the real boss was a guy named Vincent Gigante, who famously wandered the streets in a bathrobe feigning insanity to throw off the cops. But in the process of that surveillance, they stumbled onto a massive mystery box that changed the entire investigation. Over and over again on those Palmer Boys Club tapes, agents kept hearing this chilling phrase, "The Commission ordered it. The Commission decided." The FBI had absolutely no idea what this meant. Up until then, they thought these 5 families were just separate, competing gangs. But this phrase suggested something entirely different.
They ultimately discovered that the Commission was actually a supreme board of directors for the entire mafia. The bosses of the 5 families met secretly to set laws, resolve disputes, and coordinate massive economic monopolies together. For instance, the wiretaps revealed they completely controlled the cement and concrete unions. If a developer wanted to build a high-rise in Manhattan, they were forced to pay a mandatory 2% tax on the contract directly to the Commission. If they refused, the mafia would just pull the workers, and the construction site would be paralyzed. The FBI now had definitive proof of a massive unified conspiracy.
Section 5. The Galante Assassination Puzzle.
But here's the thing. To truly put these bosses away for life under the RICO Act, financial extortion just wasn't enough. The FBI needed to tie the Commission to a major violent crime. They needed a murder, and they found their target in the 1979 daytime assassination of Bonanno family boss Carmine Galante. Back in 1979, Galante was gunned down in a restaurant. The police found the getaway car and pulled fingerprints off the door handle, but they just couldn't match them to anyone. Fast forward to 1985. The FBI, now armed with new technology, re-examined the evidence, and they realized a crucial detail. The prints on the handle weren't fingertips at all. They were palm prints. They quickly matched them to a mob hitman named Anthony Indelicato, but they still had to prove that the Commission actually ordered him to do it.
And here is where all the puzzle pieces finally snapped together. The FBI went back to some old surveillance video they had secretly recorded outside a Gambino family social club on the exact day of that 1979 murder. And there it was. Clear footage of the hitman, Anthony Indelicato, arriving at the club and being warmly greeted by leadership from the other families just 1 hour after Galante was killed. It was the ultimate smoking gun. It proved, beyond a doubt, that the Commission sanctioned the hit.
Section 6. The Fall of the Mafia.
With the wiretaps proving the economic extortion and the surveillance tapes proving the murders, the FBI finally had their watertight RICO case. On February 25, 1985, they launched a massive, unprecedented, coordinated strike across New York. They arrested the leadership of all 5 families simultaneously. It was a total shock to the underworld. Most of them didn't even know what the RICO Act was. But there was one final bloody twist to all of this. Gambino boss Paul Castellano actually managed to make bail. However, his own captain, the infamous John Gotti, knew the FBI wiretaps from Castellano's TV would likely send them all to prison. Gotti also knew Castellano would kill him over his secret drug dealing. So, on December 16, 1985, John Gotti had Castellano assassinated right outside a New York steakhouse, seizing control of the family for himself.
But despite Gotti's chaotic power grab, the historic commission trial moved forward, and the evidence was simply overwhelming. The jury heard the actual tapes of the bosses dividing up the city's concrete industry, and they saw the hard proof of the Galante assassination. The result? The bosses were convicted across the board. They were handed sentences ranging from 40 years to life in prison. Almost all of them died behind bars. This trial effectively severed the head of the snake and marked the absolute end of the old, untouchable New York Mafia.
But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. The FBI successfully dismantled the commission and ended the golden era of the five families. But remember that number we talked about at the very beginning? $60 billion? That was the size of the underground economy they controlled. When the mafia was removed, all that money, all those illegal industries, and all those union rackets didn't just magically disappear. It left a massive, gaping power vacuum in New York City. So the real question is, after the five families fell, who exactly stepped into the shadows to take control of it all next? Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep questioning the history around you.